My water broke right there at my feet. A violent pain tore through my belly. I gripped the side of the car so I wouldn't collapse. And in that moment, while our son was fighting to be born, my husband looked at me and said the words I will never forget, "Don't get the seat dirty." Then he picked up a towel and started wiping down the passenger seat, every motion slow, careful, meticulous, as if the most urgent thing right then wasn't his wife going into labor, but the leather upholstery of the car. I stood frozen in the driveway in front of our house, water still running down my legs, the pain still clenching my whole body. And for the first time in my marriage, I realized a terrifying truth. If a man can look at the woman carrying his child, in that state, and still care more about a leather seat, then maybe he never really loved her at all. What haunts me to this day isn't what happened afterward, it's that he genuinely didn't see that he'd done anything wrong. And that's the most horrifying part. I remember standing there, motionless. Because there are moments so painful that the brain refuses to believe they're actually happening. And that was one of those moments. My name is Delphine. I'm 31 years old. And I want to walk you through exactly how I ended up alone on a slab of concrete in a quiet neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona, watching the man I married drive away. I'm still not sure I have words big enough for it. And somewhere along the way, I want you to ask yourself what you would have done in my place. I did not marry a monster. I think that's the part that makes this so hard to sit with, so I want to say it clearly at the start. My husband, a man named Roman, knew exactly how to look like the perfect husband in public. At his work events, he kept a warm hand on the small of my back and told everyone he couldn't wait to be a father. On his social feeds, he posted photos of the half-painted nursery with captions about blessings and new chapters. People believed him. I believed him too, for a long time. But inside our house, the story ran completely differently. I was 39 weeks pregnant, swollen, exhausted, barely sleeping, and somehow still doing almost everything alone. I folded the tiny clothes. I tracked the diaper orders. I cooked and froze a month of meals so we'd have something to eat after the baby came. I compared pediatrician reviews late into the night. And over I reminded Roman that the car seat had to be installed before our son arrived. He kept saying he'd get to it. He kept saying that about a lot of things. Roman worked as a regional sales manager for a company that sold outdoor family gear, fire pits, camp furniture, the whole fantasy of cozy togetherness around a backyard flame. Think about that for a second. He spent his days selling the dream of a devoted father roasting marshmallows with his kids, then came home too drained to carry a laundry basket up one flight of stairs. When I said my back hurt, he said everyone was tired. When I said the baby had been kicking hard all afternoon, he said that sounded healthy, and went back to his phone. When I asked for help, he sighed like I'd interrupted something sacred. That sigh. If you've ever lived with someone whose sighs do more talking than their words, you already know the weight I'm describing. On weekends, he drove an hour to his parents' place. His father wanted to watch the game or hit the driving range. His mother, a woman named Coralie, always had a full plate waiting for her only son. At first, I told myself it was sweet that he loved his parents so much. Then the truth settled in slowly, the way cold water fills a boot. He wasn't visiting them like a grown man. He was running back to the people who still treated him like a prince who owed the world nothing. Coralie had opinions about everything, especially about me. She said I rested too much, worried too much, treated a natural condition like a fragile illness. She liked to say that women in her day didn't expect a parade for doing what women were built to do. Roman's father reminded me regularly that his son worked hard and deserved some peace. I wanted to ask when my own peace was scheduled to arrive. But every time I defended myself, Roman told me I was disrespecting his family. Let me show you the moment that should have warned me. The one I replayed 1,000 times later. The Friday before everything fell apart, Roman came home irritated because I'd forgotten the smoked almonds and the craft beer he wanted to bring to his parents for their golf weekend. I offered to order it for delivery. Not good enough. He said they needed it in the morning. When I suggested he stop at the store himself, he looked at me like I'd slapped him. "You've been home all day," he said. Home all day. As if home all day hadn't meant laundry and insurance calls and swollen feet and the constant low-grade fear that hit every time a contraction rolled through. I drove to the store anyway. One hand on the wheel, one hand on my belly. I bought everything on his list. Then, because some stubborn corner of my heart still wanted to make him smile, I added a golf glove he'd mentioned weeks earlier. In the checkout line, a cashier asked when I was due. "Tomorrow," I almost said. I smiled and said soon. Out in the parking lot, the case of beer was too heavy to lift, and I stood there pretending to rearrange bags so no one would notice I couldn't manage it. That's when a neighbor named Odette walked over and helped load the trunk. Odette asked where Roman was. I said he was busy with work. And she held my eyes for a moment and said something that lodged in my mind permanently, that busy men can still find a way to be decent men. I thought about that the whole drive home. Roman didn't thank me. He complained I'd bought the wrong almonds, criticized the pasta I'd made, said his mother's version actually had flavor. I reminded him I'd been on my feet for hours. He shook his head like I was making excuses. He tried on the golf glove and said nothing at all. 10 minutes later he gathered the snacks and the beer and the glove and left for his parents' house, because he wanted, in his words, a normal meal. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a tiny blue bib beside my cold plate, wondering why I was still trying to earn love from a man who treated my exhaustion like a personal insult. If you've ever set a plate for someone who didn't bother to show up, this part needs no explanation. The next evening, Roman came home wearing a particular smile, the one he wore when he'd already decided something and just needed me to play along. I was on the couch with a heating pad, finishing thank you cards from the baby shower, hoping he'd finally arranged his paternity leave or called the pediatrician like he'd promised. Instead, he announced that his parents had upgraded the trip. A resort. 3 days of golf. His mother had found a package deal, and his father had already booked the tea times. I waited for him to laugh and say it was a joke. He didn't. Roman, my due date is next week, I said. He waved it off the way you wave off a fly. Due dates are just estimates. Babies come late all the time. And anyway, the tickets were non-refundable. I asked if he was serious. He looked genuinely offended and said it was a family trip. I said our family was about to include a newborn, that our son could come any day. He sighed like I was being dramatic on purpose. He said I wasn't the first pregnant woman in history. He said his own mother flew while she was carrying him. And here's where I have to stop and be honest with you, because it matters. Roman genuinely believed he was being reasonable. In his mind, these were facts. First babies take a long time. Hospitals are full of professionals. He'd just be standing there, useless, while machines did the work. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He'd been raised to believe a man provides the money and a woman absorbs everything else. Quietly, gratefully. So when I asked him to stay, he honestly felt ambushed. Like I was building a cage around him. That's what makes this so much darker than simple villainy. He couldn't see what he was doing, because no one ever taught him to. Understanding that doesn't excuse him, but it explains him. And somehow the explanation is worse. Then his mother called, and he put her on speaker. Coralie said men needed a moment too, because once the baby came, everything would revolve around me and the child. His father chimed in from the background that women had babies every single day and I'd be fine. Coralie added that if I started acting helpless now, poor Roman would never get a moment's peace as a father. I said quietly that peace didn't mean abandoning your responsibilities. And Coralie gave a soft little laugh, the kind that sounds polite, and lands like an open palm across the face. She said I'd understand marriage better when I stopped expecting my husband to orbit around me. I turned to Roman and said, very calmly, that if he left and something went wrong, I would not forget it. He asked if that was a threat. I said it was a boundary. He rolled his eyes, but I caught the flash of anger underneath. After that, he treated me like I was punishing him. Short answers. Complaints about the hospital bag by the door. He installed the car seat wrong and then told me to stop nagging when I pointed it out. So I fixed it myself, kneeling in the driveway, sweating, following an instruction video on my phone while our son pressed hard against my ribs. Every time the straps clicked into the wrong slot, I thought about how Roman would have blamed me if anything happened to the baby on the drive home from the hospital. That was when Odette came by again, this time with soup and banana bread. She noticed my tired face, the hospital bag by the door, the way I kept pressing a hand into my lower back. She asked, gently, whether I had someone to drive me to the hospital if labor started. I opened my mouth to say my husband. The words wouldn't come. She placed a hand over mine and said to call any time, day or night, no questions asked. I nearly cried right there. This near stranger had offered me more in one sentence than my husband had managed in weeks. What neither of us knew yet was that Odette had a doorbell camera, and it was pointed at the street. That night, Roman went out with friends for what he called one last normal evening, before fatherhood like fatherhood was a sentence being handed down, and I was the guard with the keys. He came home after midnight smelling like beer and fried food and fell asleep without asking why I was sitting up in the dark with tears on my face. I'd been timing irregular contractions for 2 hours. They faded before dawn. My fear did not. I looked at him sleeping so peacefully and understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that when the real pain came, I might face it completely alone. I had no idea how right I was. The morning he left began with the sound of suitcase wheels dragging across the hallway floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through a low, deep pressure that had pulled me out of sleep before sunrise. I told him I didn't feel right. He said I was just nervous, that I'd worked myself up over the trip. I reminded him my due date was the next day. He said he'd be home before dinner if everything went according to plan. I almost laughed. Nothing about this pregnancy had gone according to plan. He packed protein bars into his carry-on while his phone buzzed without stopping. His mother wanted to know if he'd left yet. His father wanted to know if he'd remembered the golf glove. I asked him, one more time, to stay. Not forever, just until our son was safely born. Roman looked irritated rather than guilty. Delphine, he said, I can't build my whole life around your anxiety. I went silent. He took my silence as agreement and carried his suitcase out to the SUV. I followed him outside, because some part of me still believed that if he saw me standing there pale, shaking, frightened, he would remember I was his wife. He shut the trunk and checked his watch. I opened my mouth to say his name. Then the warmth broke loose and rushed down my legs. I looked down and saw the fluid spreading across my leggings and pooling on the concrete. My water broke, I whispered, then said it louder. Roman, my water broke. I need to go to the hospital, now. For 1 second, one single second panic crossed his face. I reached for the passenger door, certain that this, finally, was the moment he'd choose us. Instead, his eyes dropped to the seat. He pulled an old towel off the garage shelf and started wiping the edge of the passenger side, even though I hadn't sat down, even though there was nothing yet to wipe. I told him the baby was coming. He snapped that he knew, and told me to stop yelling. I wasn't yelling. I was terrified. There's a difference, and he should have known it. His phone buzzed again. He read the message and cursed. His parents were already at the airport gate. I told him to drive me to the medical center. Less than 20 minutes away, he dragged both hands down his face, and said the words I would replay for the rest of my life. Delphine, listen to me. You'll be fine. Call a cab or get an Uber. The tickets are non-refundable and my parents are waiting. I asked if he was honestly going to leave his wife in labor in our own driveway. He said I was making it sound worse than it was. First babies take hours, he said. The hospital has staff for this. He'd just be standing around being useless. And then he asked me, what I even expected him to do there. Hold my hand while I screamed? Something inside me went cold and quiet. I think that cold is its own kind of mercy. It's the body pulling you out of the burning building of your own hope. I tried to grab the door handle anyway. He stepped between me and the car. Don't get in like that, he said, looking at my soaked leggings. I just had the interior cleaned. And that was the moment I stopped begging. I want you to picture this next part with me, slowly, because it's the heart of everything, and it deserves to be stretched all the way out. I backed away from him, one hand reaching for the side of the garage as another contraction folded my body forward at the waist. The pain was enormous, a tightening that took the air right out of me, and I breathed through it the way I'd practiced. In through the nose, slow and shaking. Roman didn't move toward me. He looked toward the street instead, like he was worried a neighbor might see. Like the embarrassment of being witnessed was a bigger problem than the woman doubled over in front of him. He didn't look like a husband watching his wife suffer. He looked like a man whose morning had been inconvenienced. The street was so ordinary it was almost cruel. Somewhere a dog barked twice and went quiet. A delivery van rolled slowly past the end of the block, the driver checking an address, completely unaware that a few hundred feet away a marriage was ending on a driveway. The morning air smelled like warm asphalt and someone's sprinklers, and I stood in the middle of all that normalcy with fluid drying on my legs and my son pushing down inside me, and I thought, very clearly, I am completely alone, and I have to keep us both alive anyway. Roman opened the driver's door. Text me when you get checked in, he said. Don't make this a bigger deal than it has to be. He climbed in. The engine turned over. And then he backed out of the driveway, straightened the wheel, and drove away, leaving me standing there with one hand on the garage and one hand on my stomach. I didn't scream after him. I didn't chase the car down the street. I just stood there, listening to the engine fade into the distance, and the silence that came after was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Roman. I'll call you when we land. Please don't start drama with my parents. I stared at the words until they blurred into nothing. I wanted to fold straight down onto the concrete and let the world stop. But another contraction tore through me and reminded me that my son still needed me to stand. So I did the only thing left. I called Odette. I could barely get the words out. I need help. Odette didn't ask a single question. She just said, I'm coming. Less than a minute later she was there, with towels and a steady voice and hands that didn't shake. She helped me into the passenger seat of her own car. She didn't care about the upholstery, not for 1 second, and she called the labor and delivery unit on the way, telling them calmly that we were coming in. As another contraction stole my breath, I watched my house shrink in the side mirror, and somewhere in all that pain I understood something permanent. A man who abandons you at your weakest moment should never again be trusted with the power to hurt you quietly. If you've ever had a near stranger show up for you in a way the people who were supposed to love you never did, you already feel this in your bones. It turned out Odette had been a labor and delivery nurse for 15 years before she retired. That's why her voice never wavered, why she knew exactly how to time my breaths, why the staff trusted her the second we arrived. At the hospital they brought a wheelchair. When a nurse asked if my support person was parking the car, I swallowed hard and said my support person was already here, and I pointed at Odette. The nurse understood instantly. She put a privacy flag in my file and asked, gently, if there was anyone I did not want allowed into the room. My husband, I said. And his parents. Saying it out loud felt like stepping over a line drawn inside my own body. I braced for guilt. What came instead was relief. We called my parents, who lived a few states away. My mother answered cheerful and bright, until she heard my voice, and then the line went quiet in that terrible way. I told her the baby was coming and Roman wasn't there. My father took the phone and said, in a voice working hard to stay level, that they were booking the next flight, that I should breathe, that they were on their way. Labor blurred the hours together. Pain rose and crested and fell. My phone kept lighting up on the tray beside the bed. At first Roman sent short, clipped texts. Boarding now. Any update? Don't ignorarme. Then the tone shifted, and I could feel the floor moving under his feet from miles away. Why is my mom crying? Did you tell someone? What did you do? That was when I knew something had started outside that room, something I hadn't set in motion. I didn't answer. My son needed every ounce of strength I had. My parents arrived while I was still laboring, breathless from the airport, eyes red. My mother cried for exactly 1 second and then became a wall of calm. My father kissed my forehead and looked like a man holding himself together with both hands. Odette tried to step back to give the family space, but I asked her to stay, so she stayed. And then, hours later, my son arrived screaming, red-faced, furious at the whole world, as if he already knew he'd been wronged. When the nurse laid him on my chest, everything else simply dissolved. The driveway, the towel, the non-refundable tickets, the sound of the engine fading. All of it vanished for one sacred, silent minute. My baby was alive. He was safe. I pressed my lips to his head and whispered his name, and in my heart I gave him my own family's surname, because I wanted him bound first to the people who had actually shown up. My mother heard the name and wept. My father pressed a hand over his mouth and turned away. They understood what I was really saying. I wasn't only naming a child, I was choosing a side. Once I was moved to recovery, the phone started again. Roman. His mother. Roman again. My mother asked if I wanted it switched off. Not yet, I said. When Roman called the next time, I answered. His voice came through fast and frightened. Delphine, what is going on? Why is there a video? Why is everyone messaging me? Did you send something to my company? Talk to me. I waited. I waited for one specific question. Is the baby okay? Are you okay? Where are you? Can I come? Those were not his concerns. Not one of them. His panic was entirely about himself, his reputation, his job, the vacation crumbling in his hands. He never asked how much pain I'd been in. He never asked if our son was breathing well. He didn't say he was sorry. And so I looked down at my sleeping baby in my mother's arms and said, very quietly, Roman, this is what it costs. And I hung up. The room went completely still. My mother looked proud in a way that was also a little heartbroken. My father nodded once, slowly. I have to be honest with you here, because I've thought about that phone call more than almost any other part of this whole thing. Lying in that hospital bed, stitched and exhausted, holding a newborn, and the person who left me in a driveway calls to ask about a video instead of his child. I'm still not sure how I managed one clean sentence and a hang-up. Part of me wanted to scream. The restraint that took was not weakness. It was the loudest power I had. And I don't think most people understand that until they're forced to find out. Here is how the video got out, because I planned none of it. Odette's doorbell camera faced the street and happened to catch the corner of the driveway. It recorded Roman loading the SUV. It recorded my water breaking. It caught the argument, his body stepping between me and the car, and the vehicle backing out while I stood there bent in pain. The audio was clear enough to capture the one sentence that detonated everything. Call a cab. The tickets are non-refundable. Odette showed the footage to my parents, and then to me. Watching it once was enough. In my memory I had felt small and ashamed. On the screen I simply looked abandoned. My father had to leave the room, my mother cried without making a sound. Odette offered to delete every copy if that was what I wanted. I told her to save it. I thought, at the time, that I might need it for the divorce. I had no idea the truth was already traveling without me, because Odette had told her husband what happened. And here is the detail Roman never bothered to learn, because he never cared enough about our neighbors to ask. Odette's husband was one of the largest accounts and strategic partners of the very company Roman worked for. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't have to. He simply asked, through the proper channels, whether Roman's employer was aware of the kind of judgment their regional sales manager had shown that morning. Meanwhile, Roman and his parents did what they always did. They made it worse. His mother left a voicemail saying I had embarrassed the whole family and that a real wife doesn't punish her husband over one misunderstanding. His father texted my father that childbirth was women's business, and Roman had obligations already paid for. Roman sent message after message blaming me for making him look like a monster, demanding I fix this before it reached his office, writing that if I truly loved our son I wouldn't destroy his father's career before the boy could even recognize his face. Every single word became evidence. They kept handing me receipts I never asked for. The story first surfaced in a local parenting group, with no name attached. Someone simply asked whether a woman should forgive a husband who left her in labor because his flight was non-refundable. Then the blurred doorbell clip appeared. No names, no address, no information about the baby, but people recognized the SUV. They recognized the company Polo. They connected it to the airport photo Roman himself had posted that very morning, grinning with a coffee in his hand. The clip jumped from that group to the wider internet, and the internet did what it does. They called him the non-refundable husband. They put his smiling airport selfie right next to the silent footage of his wife bent over in the driveway. He tried to call it a misunderstanding. The video, the texts, the hospital admission time, and our son's birth time made that impossible. His company moved quickly because their entire brand was built on family. Their ads showed fathers grilling for their kids and couples wrapped in blankets around fire pits. Now their comment sections were full of people asking whether abandoning a laboring wife was part of the cozy family lifestyle they were selling. The major client canceled a standing lunch and sent a measured email to company leadership about reputation and accountability. That quiet email did more damage than 10,000 angry comments. Roman was pulled into a video meeting with HR while still at the resort, and he later complained, out loud, that the meeting happened before he'd even finished his first round of golf. Read that again. Our son had been born, and he was still on the course. They placed him on leave. His bonus was frozen. His promotion vanished from consideration. The big account was reassigned to someone else. His coworkers stopped laughing at his jokes. One of them, anonymously, commented online that Roman had always preached family values in his presentations while treating everyone beneath him like furniture. His mother faced her own reckoning when her voicemail and comments circulated through her church and social circles. His father's golf buddies started finding reasons to be busy. One of them had a pregnant daughter of his own, and word got back that he'd told Roman's father what his son did wasn't old-fashioned. It was shameful. For people who had always believed that reputation was proof of goodness, the mirror was unbearable. Roman tried to regain control the only way he knew. He called relentlessly. When the hospital blocked him, he emailed. When I didn't answer, he went to my parents. When my father told him every word would now go through a lawyer, he exploded, calling me unstable, vindictive, hormonal, unfit to make decisions. He demanded I post a public statement saying the video was misleading. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Bernadette, actually smiled when she read that. Because men like Roman were almost helpful, they mistook anger for power, so they never stopped generating evidence. Bernadette sent a formal notice. No direct contact, no harassment. Everything about the baby, the separation, the property, the custody, would go through her office. Roman left one more voicemail saying that if I came home, he might be willing to forgive me. Bernadette saved that one twice. By then, revenge wasn't something I had to chase. It was simply happening, because Roman could not stop being exactly who he was. Every defense exposed another truth. Every excuse became another document. And while he lost sleep over HR and frozen bonuses and a promotion slipping away, I was learning to feed my son, to sleep in broken pieces, and to look in the mirror without seeing the woman who'd been left behind. I saw a mother who'd survived the driveway. I saw someone who finally understood that documented truth never has to raise its voice. By the time I left the hospital, Roman had sent flowers, emails, apologies, accusations, and one long message claiming I was weaponizing motherhood. My parents brought my son and me to a rental house first, because I wasn't ready to go back to the place where Roman had abandoned me. Odette arranged for a security friend of her husband's to be nearby on discharge day, not because we expected violence, but because Roman and his parents had already shown they didn't respect boundaries. They came anyway. Roman stood near the entrance with red eyes and a bouquet from the gift shop. His mother clutched a stuffed bear like a prop. His father stood behind them with his arms crossed. When Roman saw me holding the baby, he stepped forward. My father moved between us, and hospital security did the same. Roman called my name like I was supposed to soften. I didn't. My son slept against my chest while the man who left us in a driveway begged for a public scene he could twist later. I got into my parents' car and left. That was the first time Roman understood that access to me was no longer automatic. The divorce began quietly but firmly. Bernadette filed for separation, primary custody, child support, and a temporary communication order because of the harassment. She included the doorbell video, the hospital timeline, the texts, the voicemails, his father's message, and Roman's recorded calls. At first he refused to cooperate, insisting marriage problems should stay inside the family, to which Bernadette replied that he had personally involved the airport, the internet, his employer, and both sets of parents, so that stage was over. He said he wanted to see his son. She offered supervised visits, parenting classes, written communication through a custody app. He called it insulting, then admitted he didn't see why babies needed fathers that early anyway. She wrote that down too. Later, Roman requested one phone call with me to clear the air. I agreed only because Bernadette and my parents were present and the call was recorded legally. He opened by saying this had gone far enough, and that I needed to think about what I was doing to his life. I asked if he wanted to ask about his son. He paused, then said the baby was too little to know what was happening. But he wasn't. His job knew. His parents knew. He complained that the company froze his bonus, that the big client pulled back, that his mother was crying and his father couldn't show his face at the club. I said his choices had consequences. His voice turned sharp, and he said I could have just taken the Uber and handled it like an adult. My mother gasped. Bernadette lifted one finger, reminding me to stay calm. I did. I told him he had just confirmed everything I needed to know. He tried to backtrack, saying he loved me and we could start over if I'd post a statement calling the video misleading, that a good mother would want her son raised by both parents under one roof. And I told him a good mother would never teach her son that love means abandoning someone and then demanding forgiveness for it. Then I looked at my baby sleeping against me, and I realized there was grief left, but no confusion at all. I told him I wasn't coming home, and I ended the call. After that, his own lawyer pushed him toward a settlement, because a courtroom would only expose more. I received primary physical custody. Roman got limited supervised visitation, expandable only after parenting education, counseling, and consistent support payments. The house was sold, the debts divided. I kept my son's furniture, my savings, my car, and every document Roman had always assumed I was too overwhelmed to organize. His company let him go during a restructuring, citing cultural fit and reputational risk. He told everyone I'd cost him his career. But no one made him say the tickets were non-refundable. No one made him block me from the car. No one made him tee off after learning his son had been born. He moved back in with his parents into the very house where he'd learned that men deserve service and women owe silence. His freelance work was unstable. The golf trips stopped. His mother stopped posting her family quotes. Their home, once his sanctuary, became the place where all three of them had to sit with the consequences they'd mocked me for warning them about. I moved closer to my parents for my son's first year. Odette and her husband stayed in our lives. She visited when the baby was 3 months old and cried when he wrapped his whole hand around her finger. My parents slowly stopped looking at me with fear in their eyes and started looking at me with hope again. I went back to work part-time when I was ready not to prove anything, but because I wanted my son to grow up watching a mother who rebuilt her life with patience and dignity. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was feeding a baby at 3 in the morning, signing legal papers, sitting in counseling, accepting help, and learning that love without respect was never really love at all. It was also learning not to blame myself for trusting someone who hid his selfishness behind charm. And this is what the whole thing taught me, the lesson I'd hand you if you were sitting across from me right now. Character is revealed the moment your need interrupts someone else's comfort. Anyone can love you when it costs them nothing. Pregnancy, illness, grief, fear, these aren't inconveniences to be managed. They're the tests that show you whether real love is standing in the room or whether it was never there at all. The mistake so many of us make is believing that endurance is the same thing as loyalty. that if we just absorb enough and stay quiet enough, the love will finally appear. It won't. What I understood that nobody else in that driveway did is that a closed door can protect you instead of trapping you. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to do today. If any of this hit close to home, look at the people in your life and ask, honestly, who shows up when your need is inconvenient? Not when it's easy, not when there's a photo to post, but when it actually costs them something. And then sit with this question for a minute. Are you giving your patience to someone who's earned it? Or to someone who only treats your exhaustion as a flaw? I'd really love to hear from you on this one, because I know some of you have lived a version of this story yourselves. Tell me in the comments, do you think I was right to let the truth do the talking? Comment 1 if you believe I handled it with dignity. Comment 2 if you think I should have confronted him directly in that driveway. Comment 3 if you think walking away in silence was the strongest move of all. And tell me where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now, because I'm always amazed at how far these stories travel. Have you ever watched someone show you exactly who they are at the worst possible moment? I read every single comment, and I promise you're not alone in this. If this story moved you, do me a small favor and subscribe, because we tell stories like this one here all the time, stories about ordinary people who discover their own strength on the worst day of their lives. I'd love to have you here for the next one. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. And thank you for caring. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Tucson, Arizona, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.